I was sitting in this little corner booth at a diner called the Rusty Anchor, watching the rain streak down the window like tears on a dirty face, checking my watch for the maybe 20th time. That hour it was 7:15, and the empty chair across from me was starting to feel less like a delay and more like a verdict. You know that feeling, right? That heavy, sinking sensation in your gut that tells you you're an idiot for even trying, especially after 5 years of being a widower. 5 years of telling yourself you were fine, just being a dad and a carpenter. But my sister-in-law, Sarah, she wouldn't let it go and swore up and down that Elena was different, that she was an architect who loved old houses just like I did. So here I was, wearing a button-down shirt that felt too stiff, smelling like cedar shavings and nervous sweat, staring at a menu I'd already memorized. I was just about to signal the waitress, old Marge, who's been pouring coffee there since the Nixon administration, to tell her I was cutting my losses, when the front door didn't just open, it practically exploded inward, letting in a gust of wind and rain and two of the most terrified little human beings I have ever seen in my life. They were twins, maybe 7 or 8 years old, soaking wet, their little pink rain boots squeaking on the linoleum, hair plastered to their faces. And they weren't just looking around, they were hunting, their eyes wide and frantic, scanning every face in that diner with a desperation that stopped my heart cold. And then they locked onto me. I didn't know them, I'd never seen them before, but they ran straight for my table like I was the only lighthouse in a hurricane, crashing into my legs, and one of them, the one in the yellow raincoat, grabbed my hand with these ice-cold, trembling fingers and gasped out, "Are you Caleb? Please say you're Caleb." I stood up so fast my chair screeching against the floor sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence of the room, and I dropped to one knee to get on their level, asking, "Yeah, I'm Caleb, honey, what's wrong?" Take a breath, but she shook her head violently, water flying from her hair, and choked out, "Mom sent us. She said run to the Anchor and find Caleb. She said don't stop running." And before I could even process that, the other sister, who had a smear of something dark on her cheek that looked terrifyingly like blood, whispered the words that changed my entire life. In a split second she said, "The bad man is hurting her. He's in the house. He won't stop screaming." I didn't think. I didn't pay the bill. I didn't say goodbye to Marge. I just moved on pure instinct, that old muscle memory from my days as an army medic kicking in before my brain could even catch up. And I scooped up their hands, and we were out the door into the pouring rain. And I'm shouting over the thunder, Where is she?" And they're pointing down Elm Street, crying, "The blue house, the one with the porch." And I knew that house. I'd driven past it admiring the restoration work on the trim, never knowing the woman inside was the one I was supposed to be sharing spaghetti with right now. I dialed 911 as we ran, shouting the address to the dispatcher, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from the running, but from the sheer terror on those girls' faces. And when we got to the porch, the front door was hanging open, splintered near the lock, and I could hear the shouting from the street, a man's voice, deep and ugly and full of rage. I told the girls, "Stay here behind the hedges. Do not move until I come for you." And I stepped through that broken door into a living room that looked like a war zone, lamps shattered, books torn apart, drywall punched in, and there, in the center of the chaos, was a man in an expensive suit, looking completely out of place and entirely deranged, standing over a woman who was curled on the floor, and he was screaming about blueprints and money and how she thought she could leave him with nothing. He drew back his foot to kick her again, and I didn't announce myself. I didn't say freeze. I just tackled him with every ounce of frustration and anger I'd been bottling up for 5 years, driving my shoulder into his midsection and taking us both into a bookshelf that collapsed on top of us. He was strong, fueled by adrenaline and rage, swinging wildly and catching me in the jaw. But I had something he didn't. I had a reason to fight that wasn't about greed. So I pinned him down, twisting his arm behind his back until he howled. And I held him there, panting, smelling the expensive scotch on his breath, until I heard the sirens wailing in the distance, getting closer, singing the song of salvation. But then I looked at Ellen. I knew it was her from the picture Sarah had shown me, though she looked different now. Her blonde hair matted with blood, her face already swelling, her breathing shallow and ragged. a terrifying gurgling sound coming from her throat, and I shoved the guy, whose name I later learned was Marcus. I shoved him hard against the floor and yelled, "Stay down or I swear to God I will break your arm," and I crawled over to her. I went into medic mode, checking her airway, feeling for the pulse that was thready and weak, and I saw the bruising behind her ears, the sign of a basal skull fracture, and I knew we were losing her right there on her own hardwood floor. I was stabilizing her neck, whispering, "Hold on, Elena, just hold on. The cavalry is coming," when I felt a small hand on my shoulder, and I looked back to see the twins standing there, disobeying my orders, their eyes wide and hollow, watching their mother bleed. And that image, those two innocent girls witnessing the brutality of a man who was supposed to love them, it broke something in me and rebuilt it all at once. The paramedics swarmed in a minute later, pushing me back, and the police dragged Marcus out in handcuffs, him spitting and screaming that she stole his life, that she owed him. And as they loaded Elena onto the stretcher, looking so small and fragile, the girls tried to climb into the ambulance, screaming for their mom, but the cop, a young guy who looked overwhelmed, held them back, saying, "You can't go, sweetie. We need to call social services." And that's when I stepped in, blood on my shirt, jaw aching, and I said, "No, they're with me. I'm the family friend," which wasn't technically a lie since I was supposed to be her date. And the cop looked at me, looked at the terrified girls clinging to my legs like barnacles, and he just nodded. Too tired to fight the obvious logic of compassion, we followed the ambulance to St. Jude's Hospital, me driving my beat-up truck with two traumatized little girls in the back seat, clutching each other, asking if their mom was going to die, asking why their dad, because that's who Marcus was, their father, why he did that, and I had to look at them in the rearview mirror and lie, telling them the doctors were magicians, telling them everything would be okay, while my own mind was replaying the sound of her ragged breathing. At the hospital, it was a blur of fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. That smell that always takes. The road to recovery wasn't a montage in a movie. It was ugly and hard and frustrating, full of physical therapy sessions where she'd scream in pain, days where she couldn't remember words, nights where she'd wake up screaming from nightmares. That Marcus was back in the room, but I stayed. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because I'd already lost one wife and I couldn't bear to see another family destroyed. Or maybe because those girls had wormed their way into my heart. Or maybe because even in her broken state, Elena had this fire in her, this grit that I recognized. When she was finally moved to a rehab facility, the legal battle began. And Marcus, that piece of work, hired a slick lawyer who tried to argue that it was a domestic dispute gone wrong, trying to pin some of the blame on her, saying she provoked him, implying she was unstable. I remember the day of the preliminary hearing. Elena was still in a wheelchair, bruising fading to yellow but still visible, and she was terrified to face him, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. I wheeled her into that courtroom, parked her right in the front, and I sat right next to her. And when Marcus walked in, looking smug in his orange jumpsuit, thinking his money could still buy him a way out, I put my arm around the back of her chair and stared him down until he was the one who looked away. The turning point was when the prosecutor played the 911 call, the one where you could hear the twins screaming in the background, and then my voice, and then the sound of the struggle. The courtroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop, and I saw the jury's faces harden, saw the judge look at Marcus with pure disgust. But the real nail in his coffin was Lily. She insisted on testifying, even though we all tried to talk her out of it, saying she was too young, but she stood up there, clutching that stuffed dinosaur my son had given her, and she looked her father in the eye and said, "You hurt Mommy, because you wanted her money, but you didn't get it, and now you don't have us either." Marcus actually started crying then, finally realizing that he hadn't just lost his freedom, he'd lost the only legacy that mattered, and he ended up taking a plea deal for 25 years. No parole, life after the trial settled into this strange, beautiful rhythm where boundaries were blurry and nobody seemed to mind. My apartment was too small for me and Leo, and Elena's house felt too big and haunted for her and the girls, so we sort of just converged. I'd go over there to fix the door frame I'd broken when I tackled Marcus, then I'd fix the leaky faucet, then I'd build a treehouse for the kids, and before we knew it, I was cooking dinner there 5 nights a week. It wasn't romantic at first, it was survival. It was to damaged people trying to keep a raft afloat for 3 kids who needed stability. But in the quiet moments, after the kids were asleep, we started talking, really talking. We sat on her back porch one night in late August, the crickets chirping, sharing a bottle of cheap wine. And she looked at me, really looked at me, and asked, "Why did you stay, Caleb? You could have called the cops and went home to your son. You didn't owe us anything." I took a sip of wine, thinking about how to answer that without sounding cheesy, and I told her, "When Beth died, everyone disappeared after the funeral. People get scared of grief. They get scared of things they can't fix, and I promised myself that if I ever saw someone standing on the edge of that same cliff, I wouldn't walk away." She reached out and touched my hand, her fingers tracing the scar on my knuckle from where I'd punched the bookshelf that night, and she whispered, "Thank you for catching us." And that was the first time I kissed her. It wasn't fireworks and explosions. It was like coming home after a long, hard war, soft and safe and inevitable. 6 months later, the subject of living arrangements came up because I was practically living out of a duffel bag at her place anyway, and the kids were already acting like siblings. Leo and the twins were thick as thieves, plotting schemes and building forts. I was in the kitchen, making pancakes on a Sunday morning, flipping them high to make the girls laugh, and Elena leaned against the counter, wearing one of my old t-shirts, and said, "You know, the house next door is for sale, or we could just stop pretending and you could move your tools into the garage here." I froze, spatula in midair, and looked at her. "Are you sure? I come with a lot of sawdust and a 6-year-old who thinks he's a ninja." She laughed, that sound that had become my favorite thing in the world, and said, "Caleb, you're already the foundation of this house. We're just waiting for you to frame it in." We got married a year after the attack, right in the backyard, with Leo as the best man and the twins as flower girls who ended up abandoning their baskets to chase butterflies. It wasn't about erasing the past. Elena still had headaches sometimes, and the girls still got quiet when people yelled, and I still missed Beth in that quiet ache sort of way, but it was about building something new. On top of the rubble, we didn't try to be a perfect family. We were a mosaic, a bunch of broken pieces glued together with grit and love to make something stronger than.
If I had left that diner 5 minutes earlier, if I had ignored those girls, if I had let the system take over, 3 lives, 4, counting mine, would be completely different, probably darker, definitely lonelier. It's funny how we think we are the heroes of our own stories, but usually, we are just the supporting actors waiting for our cue to step up. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, look around you, really look. Maybe the interruption you're annoyed by today is actually your destiny knocking down the door. Maybe the person who needs you isn't the one you made an appointment with, but the one who shows up unannounced and soaking wet. And I want to ask you, if your door burst open tonight, if chaos ran straight at you asking for help, would you be ready to drop everything and run into the storm? Or would you stay in the booth and finish your coffee? Think about it, because you never know when the rain is going to bring you a miracle disguised as a disaster. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. I read every single one of them. Take care of each other out there.